Okay, it is 12:02, so we can go ahead and begin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Renkert, and I'm the Development and Engagement Manager for the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. Welcome to the Dam Busters 201 series, which is a collaboration between us, the Charles River Watershed Association, and the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. This webinar series offers basic information about dam removals. It is not intended to advocate for the removal of any particular dam or dams. For the 201 series topics and exact schedule, please visit the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance website at www.massriversalliance.org. We're still adding some sessions to the series, so we recommend that you check the site frequently for the latest information. Also, please mark your calendars for the next 2 sessions that we have coming up in June. One will be on June 4th, and one will be on June 11th. The June 4th one will be our first session of 3 sessions this year on community engagement, which we're really excited about. And on June 11th, Professor Noah Snyder will be back to Dam Busters again to talk about the top 10 ways to tell if your river reach is insensitive to disturbance. Today's webinar is about streamlining permitting for restoration. A few housekeeping items. First, this session is scheduled to end at 1 p.m. Second, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which Mass River staff will be tracking, or hold them until the last 20-minute or so question and answer session. Please put your name and affiliation in the chat now, and please note that these webinars are being recorded. The recordings and any other webinar materials will be made available on the Mass Rivers website. A special shout out to all of you who have been completing the post-session surveys, and an even more special shout out to the 7 people who have sent us information about their experiences with dam removal permitting. As you'll see from today's presentation, getting your feedback on permitting can help improve the permitting system as a whole. The surveys and information you provide make a huge difference in our ability to keep the program free for all and to expand the program. We will post a link to that survey in the chat today as well for anyone else to fill out. And now I'm delighted to introduce our 2 speakers today, Heidi Ritchie of Mass Audubon and Michael Chelminsky from Stantec Consulting. Heidi Ritchie is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Mass Audubon with decades of experience in environmental policy, coalition building, and public engagement. She is a lead author on Losing Ground, Nature's Value in a Changing Climate. Heidi worked on statewide policies to integrate protection and restoration of nature with a clean energy transition. She serves on the Nashua Rivers Wild and Scenic Stewardship Council and on the boards of the Citizens Planner Training Collaborative, Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, and the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. And she has received several awards for her advocacy. Michael Chelminsky is a licensed professional engineer with Stantec Consulting Services in their Northampton, Massachusetts office. Michael is an enthusiastic dam removal practitioner and has led approximately 80 reconnaissance and preliminary dam removal studies in Massachusetts, 2 of which resulted in expedited dam removals. Thank you both for joining us. I am now going to turn it over to Heidi to begin her presentation.
Thanks, Anna. And thanks everyone who is attending today. I see some familiar names here, so welcome you all. And I think there's some folks even from out of state, so I hope that the information on what's going on in Massachusetts will be of use to you as well. So just going to get started. We've got a lot of material to cover. This will work. Okay. I'm just going to start real briefly with introducing Mass Audubon. I think many of you know us. Mass Audubon is one of the oldest and largest conservation organizations in New England. We have an ambitious action agenda that has 3 interconnected goals: protecting resilient and healthy natural lands, making sure everyone has access to the benefits of nature, and then mobilizing to address climate change, including the important roles that nature has to play in climate mitigation and resiliency. So these goals are all interconnected, and restoration of our rivers and wetlands is important to these goals. So just an overview of what we hope that you will take away from this webinar today. I think you all know that dam removals are generally beneficial. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here. But we're going to talk about that in more detail. It give a sense of how big of scope the need is here in Massachusetts. And the main focus is on the challenges of permitting these projects and solutions for that. So you may be familiar with the Society for Ecological Restoration, how we define ecological restoration. It's assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been damaged, degraded, or destroyed. And with dams, it's mostly severe degradation of our river systems for the most part. And what do we mean by assisting in recovery? It means helping nature take care of itself by identifying stressors like dams and taking action to remove those so that the ecosystem can heal itself naturally and function naturally. Removing barriers to connectivity, so that's clearly within the realm of dam removal. And it's most important, of course, to involve people in all of this, particularly for dam removals. It's important to involve the local community early and often in order to make sure that there's understanding and support and that you're taking into account all of the local considerations. So I want to start just by putting dam removals in the context of the even larger scope of need for restoration across Massachusetts. So we have our salt marshes, which are protected from development or filling now, even though we lost a large percentage of them historically. But they are, for the most part, in tough shape. They've got thousands and thousands of ditches and old agricultural embankments. So there's work that needs to be done there. And then, of course, we have the 3,000 dams, most of which are now obsolete and not serving any useful purpose. In particular, the many in the upper headwaters where there's not sediment contamination and not a lot of infrastructure or buildings nearby, we really need to accelerate the pace of removal on those. Massachusetts removed 4 dams last year. Pennsylvania did 27. With 3,000, if we want to get rid of say half of them, we're going to really need to speed up the pace considerably. There's also big challenges with culverts, road stream crossings. I'm not going to go into that in detail here, but there's lots of them, 25,000, some people say 30,000. And then cranberry bogs are another opportunity for restoration with so many of them coming out of production. This work is really important to the state's big goals for both climate and biodiversity, as well as environmental justice. So I just have up here some of the state plans where restoration is mentioned and there are action steps planned. It's also in the Fish and Game's strategic plan and in their biodiversity strategy that's going to be coming out soon. So just overall framing, so how do rivers function? And what are the important processes involved? So rivers need not just water and flowing water, but also the ability of that water to move sediment around and to continually readjust itself. Rivers are dynamic systems, they're not set in stone. And then, of course, the role of wood as that is essential to habitat for fish and wildlife along rivers. But dams stop all of that. They block not only the flow of water, but also all that sediment and wood collects behind the dam, starves the downstream system, and blocks up upstream. So we have all these dams that were built, many of them 100 or more years ago, that have no function anymore. Many of them are hazards as well. And yet there's really no law that requires them to be removed unless they are really a safety hazard. And even then, oftentimes the Office of Dam Safety will allow a drawdown or just a lowering of the impoundment without really breaching it and opening it up for fish passage and the like. So our laws really are not structured to remedy this situation. And that's going to be the focus of what I talk about later on. We can and are doing dam removals, and Michael's going to give a lot of examples of that. But when dams come down, we see nature recovering almost instantly. This was an example of where the sea lampreys came in right after the dam was removed. And we've seen that in other cases too, where like herring have returned, etc. But it takes a lot of effort. In this case, it was, only a bit over a year, but it was still a lot of work to make that little dam come out. So I will return later on to talk more about the solutions to all of this. But here's the overall goal. We want to restore our river systems and reconnect them, remove the old fill and water control structures that were installed oftentimes long ago without any permits, and restore the natural processes. I apologize for the typo. Restore the habitat and remove flood hazards, and reconnecting our floodplains, restoring bordering vegetated wetlands, and just improving overall. So I'm going to hand it over to Michael now, and I'll go through the slides for him.
Right on. Well, thanks very much, Heidi. So I appreciate stepping in here today on behalf of this community, which I so appreciate. I've seen some of our incredible practitioners out there. I can't name all the wonderful peers on here. You know who you are. And many of you have been supporting this for years, so thank you. Streamlining dam removal. So Heidi touched on some of this, and what I'm going to roll through is when we get to design and permitting, we've actually pretty much got it nicked. So I'm going to try and do this the way we'd like to remove dams, which is burn through 7 examples here and just give a quick basis for that. The Anguilla rostrata is going to show us the way. Next slide there, Heidi. So I've got 7 examples up here, and they span 15 years of dam removal in Massachusetts, along with 2 projects that we've tucked in from outside of the state. 2009, 2010, we got Montsweek Dam removal in Maine. And also we're adding 2018 to 2022, South Branch Gale River dam removal in New Hampshire. And the idea is to show some of the progression. Now this chart, whatever you want to call it, is pretty evil. You see there at the Oxpasture Brook, 3.5 years of construction. That's in the gray. And then that little blob of red, that's the duration of construction. If you look at the time value of resources that are impacted by the permitting process, 3.5 years versus what little happens during a short construction window, you think, wow, maybe we should be working on these and actually fostering dam removal. You know, there have been numerous natural resource damages assessments that have looked at dam removal and accepted it as the basis for removing it, that removing a dam makes good things happen. So take a look at that and finally get to the bottom there. Not only do we have permitting on the front end, but you have permitting on the back end. And that's a pretty special project. Next slide there, Heidi. So this is just a table following on the information in the previous chart. And we've got the 2 non-Massachusetts projects there, but they're sandwiched in between 15 years of projects. And there's a couple of outliers in here that are real short. 2014, the Cold Brook in Harwich, little dam removal there, and then Dudleyville Pond Dam last year. I mean, that took 7 months. Ideally, we're shooting for once a month. And why the rush? Because we have 13,000 dams in this state. Let's call it a good 100 of those. We should just be pulling those out as fast as we can get big yellow equipment to them and then getting it out of there. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that Susie Bresney put together as part of an MACC presentation on March 1 this year. And it shows your typical dam removal process on the top and all that fundraising, a lot of uncertainty with that, feasibility, primary design, year 2, year 3, year 4, final design, bidding, all that, 5 years you get to construction. And then I think that construction arrow here is still too big relative to the other process. Dudleyville Dam removal process last year was an emergency order from a conservation commission. Look what got done in 7 months. And the funny part, that was less than 2 weeks of construction. Next slide. So continuing the highly caffeinated approach, let's go back to 2009. We actually removed this dam on Oxpasture Brook in the William Ford Wildlife Management Area in Rowley, Mass. Goal is restore aquatic connectivity and intertidal habitat. Great things, constraints, environmental contaminants, and construction access. This is near the coast. It's tidal at the toe of the dam. So you think coast, marshes, mosquitoes, DDD breaks down to DDT breaks down to DDE and DDD. Next slide, please. You can do a lot of work studying that. What are these contaminants? And you realize gosh, they aerial sprayed this stuff, so it's bad. So after a bit of work, we got the dam removal, a few constraints, had small equipment. But after 3.5 years of work, you have 2 weeks of dam removal construction. This project was scoped for 5 years of post-construction monitoring to track movement of DDD and DDE downstream. That was terminated after 3 years because we found no signature above background. Next slide, please. And here are just some shots. You've probably all seen the low tide scenario. That's right after dam removal. That's on the bottom here, right after removal. And you got a slide there 9 months later on top. So these projects are incredibly resilient. It speaks to the resilience of our rivers and of our tidal systems in this case with some tidal push. So another proof of concept here. Next slide. Monsweed Dam removal. This was done at the head of tide on Monsweed Brook in Maine on the borders of Woolwich and Wiscasset. Objective was to restore aquatic habitat connectivity as part of a natural resources damage settlement for closure of a nuclear power plant. This was a dam built in 1968. And the basic idea was, gosh, can dam removal restore natural resources, including aquatic connectivity and habitat? Yes, it can. Next slide, please. Oh, but you get the dreaded low tide scenario. Wow, nobody wants to look at this. You know, we spent 2 years permitting this because it largely fell under the aegis of the nuclear facility. 1.5 years of design and permitting, 10 weeks for construction. What's really important here, though, is we see the resiliency of these systems. So that's what these early slides are. You could take it back 15 years to say, what are we learning from this dam removal experience? Let's take a look at the next slide. Oh, wow, one growing season later. That is the same location. You can see the split in the clouds back there. So what you realize is, wow, these environments are really incredible. And what we need to do is get the impediment out of there. This dam was 22-foot hydraulic height, was a barrier to all fish, and also altered a 1 mile reach of, this was a salter brook trout stream. So if you look around here, you think of what David Gould has done down in Plymouth with salter brook trout, the absolute rock stars of our coastal fish here. We can make these things happen again. We have the capacity to restore them, and low tide doesn't last forever. Next slide, please. So what's next? Oh, Bartlett Rod Shop Company Dam on Amethyst Brook. Heidi had a bunch of slides up on this. 20-foot hydraulic height, had about 15 feet of coarse sediment in the impoundment. The idea was this dam was actually flagged by, it was then actually was DER already, not Riverways. It was flagged because the dam owner was told, you have to do something with this dam. It's a real problem. And initially it was, wow, a lot of sediment. That's bad for the stream. And a gentleman named Boyd Kennard decided, holy cow, I want to see that stuff in the river. And the lamprey pictures that Heidi showed you, that was June 2013, right after it was done. So we think major short-term impact, but a lot of benefits to this, and it goes to the impairment associated by these structures. Next slide, please. Okay, so removing a dam. We know this is a mess, but check out the base of the dam. You can see, wow, we have some BMPs down there. We have the slippery slide for the water to go through the site. This was done by Sumco Eco Contracting. They used adaptive water management approaches, and they got it done. It was very protective. So we spent a few years permitting and, well, designing and permitting this, ideally hand in glove. 8 weeks of construction, 4,000 cubic yards of sediment repositioned. There was no way to get sediment off that site. And sea lamprey showed up 6 months after completion. They hadn't been seen there in years. Next slide, please. And there you have the site. So it's pretty neat. You go from what's above there. The excavator is basically operating on that channel that you see about 6 months following dam removal construction. Now we got a couple of slides after this. So step on. There you go. So this is the downstream reach. And you see during construction in the late fall and early winter of 2012, we had a lot of a very dynamic system down there. If you walk through this dynamic system, not impacts, June 6, 2013, there were sea lamprey spawning in there for the first time in years. Let's take a look at the next slide, which is upstream impacts. This is called rivers in action. And you can also see this is when we had incision in the upstream area where sediment was repositioned. All this is part of natural fluvial processes that we get cutting into glacial deposits here in New England. There's nothing to fear about this unless you think an adult lamprey pre-spawn is going to come up there and attach to you when you're swimming. It's not. Next slide, please. So lessons learned. We learned a lot about the process here, but finally we get to the bottom is sediment's not that bad. And also our dam safety regulations in Massachusetts do not globally legislate contaminants in the impoundment. And yet when we do dam removal, we're asked to characterize this as if the dam owner was the potentially responsible party for all that sediment. So we've got to have a mindset about this, that these sediments are pretty good and these dams are very ineffective actually capturing the contaminants. Next slide, please. Let's see what happens next. So that project took about 3.5 years. Here's a neat one, Gravesley Pond Dam out of Sackett Brook in the Canoe Meadows Wildlife Sanctuary owned by Mass Audubon. This was a recreational dam and bridge. We're looking upstream through the bridge at the dam that was built in the 30s, so a person could have a place to hunt, fish, and probably drink bourbon. Mass Audubon wanted to get rid of it. They'd received funding for the natural resources damages compensatory restoration for the GE Houstonic River site, but then impacts at the Pittsfield Airport required mitigation, and Pittsfield Airport came in and got this. So think about that. This project was twice put on the hook as mitigation for offsite environmental impacts. Doesn't that tell you that this is a good project? Well, it is in some ways. If we go to the next slide, we'll see design and permitting was all done in 1 year because it was essentially the permitting for the Pittsfield Airport in this case said, you've got to do offsite mitigation. This was recognized as a good piece of work. So there was 6 years of planning, 1 year of design and permitting, 2 weeks of dam and bridge removal. Just goes to the speed. And what's important is the speed of that minimizes the temporal impacts of construction. And here you have it during the completion of construction in the fall of 2013. This is just a pretty good project. Mass Audubon also did quite a bit of additional work. Next slide, please. Where are we going next? Now, so the last one was a year of design and permitting, 2 weeks of construction. We've all talked about accelerating dam removal, so let's take a look at this. It's Cold Brook in Harwich, just the subject of a fantastic project designed by Interfluve, constructed by Sumco, that was an award-winning project in the Cranberry Bog upstream. But as part of a recon study on March 5, 2014, we went out to this site. This is a former roadbed and a dam that was left open because it's failing. It was recognized that the outlet there, you can see looking downstream, was actively failing when we were out there. Also, it's in a tidal reach. It's a really high-value area. The dam was condemned during the site visit. A lot of work was done, led by Division of Ecological Restoration with input from others, Brad Chase, Division of Marine Fisheries, to allow construction in March 2014. And you're thinking, okay, site visit was March 5, 2014. What are we talking about here? Well, it's a hazardous structure and a tidal reach, very high value resource. Let's get rid of this thing. And wasn't used for anything. The town didn't know they owned it until they looked at the maps and said, we own it. So opportunities to eliminate impacts to aquatic habitat from dam failure. This would have dumped a lot of sand in there. Next slide. Cool. So you have a town crew with rented equipment gets out there for 2 days. It's a pretty sizable structure. So 1 month of project planning was actually about 20 days. 20 days design and permitting within that. And then 2 days for dam removal. Let's take a look at the next slide. Oh, this is it. So there's the cover. This is a plan set. Hit go on that. Next slide. Oh, there's it. Those are the plans. Oh, one more sheet maybe? Oh yeah, that's it. 4-page plan set. That's the way we should be doing some of these small dams. The community in Massachusetts has the skills, experience, and expertise to do that. We also know that dam removal works very well to mitigate these impacts. We've seen a couple of projects so far that were done as mitigation for offsite impacts. Next slide, please. And there you have it. So March 25th, and then on a drive-by on May 7th. Nothing looks wrong with that site, and recognize again, this is a tidally influenced site. So the bench on the photo on the right is actually within the intertidal zone. That's photo on the right, left side, intertidal bench. We just restored full tidal exchange to that. Pretty cool project, properly done in 21 days. Next slide, please. South Branch Gale River dam removal. So we often talk about partnership here, and this project is a great example of extreme partnership. It's up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a water supply dam built in the 1950s. Amy Singler of American Rivers took this on with a partnership that included New Hampshire Fish and Game, New Hampshire DES, and folks who are allocating the Mitigation Enhancement Fund for the 15 Miles Falls hydroelectric project. If you have big dams on the Connecticut River, the idea is why don't we mitigate some of that by taking a cold water trip and getting rid of a dam that's no longer used and also has some kind of administrative problems sitting on a national forest. Primary constraints here is working with the National Forest and the National Forest Service. It's tough. They've got a lot of rules and regulations. They're bound by the federal acquisition regulations. but you have a really strong team. So what can happen? Well, you have a 5% slope. You could have an unstable channel. You're not going to deal with 6-foot diameter stable material. So a dam like this, you just say, let's get it out. Not much in the way of infrastructure problems. And the project opportunity, the partnership with New Hampshire DES, let's see what happens on the next slide. So we had 2 years of design and permitting. That was from a reconnaissance study in July 2018 to actual construction in the late summer of 2014. We had 6 weeks of construction. Key element there, let's see the next slide, if it's on there. Didn't get to know. Oh yeah, down there at the bottom. So project history, you see it there. Really key element. Permitting was by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Why would they be doing that? Well, because they have the expertise. They also they were striving to streamline dam removal permitting, and the folks there wanted to be the acid test for how their system worked. And this partnership, again, with American Rivers, Littleton Water and Light District, New Hampshire Fish and Game, New Hampshire DES, and a consultant with a little bit of experience designing this, it worked really well. So that's it. That's an example of great partnership. Next slide. So last year, there was a neat and effective dam removal out in Dudleyville, and Shutesbury, Massachusetts, that started as a ecological restoration preliminary design study for dam removal contracted by the Division of Ecological Restoration. Went out there last January and saw this dam, believe it or not, significant hazard dam in unsafe condition, not poor condition. 3 separate consultants had visited this dam, and very reputable Massachusetts engineering firms do these and said, that dam is unsafe. There's also a culvert just downstream. So we could have done a preliminary design and put this on the 5-year track. The reality is the dam's in unsafe condition. 70 feet downstream, you have a stone masonry culvert that's in bad shape and grossly undersized. So the dam's bad, the culvert's bad. You get out of that, you get a super bad. Nobody needs super bads in there. So the primary motivation for this was, let's get rid of one of the bads and downgrade the system bad from super bad to just bad. And instead of waiting 5 years in which this dam would have failed, we were later given photos from May 2014 with water coming through the dam where the excavator is. Not good. There was an opportunity to move forward and improve public safety. Next slide. So here's Chris Hirsch and Susie Bresney, if you don't recognize them from behind, and one of the Sumco team and an excavator making the dam go away. This is about 7 months after the first site visit, and it took 2 weeks of what I'd call casual construction. Because of the concern for the environment, we've got a contractor and a team here that really knows what they're doing, a lot of expertise. The prime directive here was, let's maintain conditions downstream in the brook to support the existing brook trout population, which is a target for restoration. Let's make this project effective. Let's address some of the constraints. Now, if you look through the spectrum of projects here, we've covered pretty much all the classic constraints we see in dam removal: sediment, adjacent infrastructure. The Massachusetts community knows how to put these pieces together. We have the expertise. We have numerous contractors in this state who have a dozen or more dam removals under their belt. I think Sumco has 40 to 50 dam removals just in Massachusetts. Collectively, this partnership has the skills and abilities to make these projects go away. Let's see what's on the next slide. Okay, I forgot to edit that slide. So we've got some clone bones sitting in there. That's the wrong stuff, but that's okay. This is Dudleyville Dam, a couple of weeks after construction. You can see a little bit of vegetation coming up through the erosion control blanket. That's about a 2-to-1 slope. You can barely see the culvert under the road. And if that culvert occludes and overtops, it could take out a road downstream. The dam was there on the right. There's the impoundment. There's a fantastic, what is going to be super high functioning wetland complex. Come this summer, if other examples we've seen in Massachusetts are any indication, you're going to have 3 to 4 feet of herbaceous vegetation in there. So a project that was done, 7-month timeline, total cost of contracted services about $118,000. So looking at this compared to a regular dam removal project in Massachusetts, about 20% the cost, 20% the time. Let's see what's on the next slide. Oh, there's a lesson for the day. Not every project is complicated. We've got the expertise in Massachusetts to execute dam removals in a really expedited manner. Particularly, let's take 10% on the bottom end of that and just make these dams go away to restore the natural resources, functions, and values that are impeded by these structures. That said, I'll call it quits. Thank you very much.
Heidi, I think you're muted.
Sorry, my cursor wasn't working to unmute. Thank you, Michael. That is amazing. I think you gave every different kind of example, from headwaters to big dams to tidal, and all the challenges, sediment and contaminants and et cetera, and showing how we know how to do these projects. What are the barriers to doing these projects, doing more of them, doing them faster and less expensive? I started working on wetlands restoration streamlining years ago, but it's really ramped up in the last few years. A couple years ago, Conservation Law Foundation and myself did a survey of 139 different folks, everything from nonprofit organizations that are doing restoration to municipalities to state and federal agencies and academics. And we asked a lot of different questions about what the challenges they were encountering for restoration projects, including dam removals. And we found that overwhelmingly permitting came up over and over as the biggest challenge. You'll see some of these numbers add up to more than 139 because there were combined responses, multiple questions about permitting. So that's why the totals don't add up. But at any rate, and there are funding and capacity challenges as well. But these things are interrelated. So, for example, as Michael said, if we can remove one, small headwater dam for maybe $200,000 versus $1 million plus, that's and do it, more efficiently, that's going to also help take care of some of these funding and capacity challenges as well. And there was a real sense of urgency. Lots of folks wrote, their own comments, and Ali Heipel from CLF also interviewed a subset of the participants and got some really detailed input. And there was just a real desire to figure out how to do all this more efficiently while being protective. The need for more coordination and across the different programs, people getting bounced from one permit agency to another, desire for everybody to be talking together and working together and really prioritizing restoration, recognizing the benefits. So what do we mean when we say the permitting system is complicated? Well, here's a list of some of the most commonly encountered permits. There are oftentimes others in addition. And I'm not going to go through each of these in detail, but I'm going to highlight a couple of them just to show you how I'm thinking about this conceptually. So it's the cost, the complexity, the time involved, and noting that this is particularly burdensome on the EJ communities, that Massachusetts has a priority to improve the environment in our environmental justice communities that have been disproportionately burdened by environmental harms. So if you're trying to restore a river in an urban area, for example, you're already going to have capacity constraints, funding constraints. The land is more expensive. Everything you do there is more expensive. You're more likely to have contamination that you've got to deal with, perhaps removal of asphalt and other things. And so I'm not saying that you don't need any permitting for those situations because they are complex, but we do need to make it efficient. And this is really getting to the heart of why I think we need to think differently about permitting for these projects and get back to the roots of what is the purpose of these important environmental laws that apply to these projects. What is the purpose? What are the public interests that are served by those laws? And how can we reform the permitting system for restoration to better serve those important public interests? So, for example, under the State Wetlands Protection Act, there are 8 public interests, and these relate to water resources, clean water, for water supply and for the environment in general, fish and other wildlife, including groundwater protection. Groundwater, of course, is important to our streams, provides the stream flow throughout the year, as well as our aquifers. Flood control, right? A dam that's failing or in bad shape is a flood hazard. And also, people often think that dams provide flood control. That's actually not true, except in very rare instances, like some of the Army Corps dams that were designed for flood control, and then the impoundment is kept basically empty all of the time, except for when it's needed for flood storage. So for most of our dams where we see the impoundments regularly full, they're not helping with flooding. They're creating hazard. And they slow the water, make it warmer, contribute to pollution. And we know that they're impacting the natural habitats for fish and wildlife and reducing connectivity. Connectivity is all the more important with climate change and the need for animals and fish to be able to move around. Our rivers should be our highways for fish and wildlife and for native plants. And with all of these barriers, these thousands and thousands of barriers, that is really cut off. So now let's look at the purpose of Chapter 91. This is the Waterways Act. Chapter 91 licenses are often required for a dam removal project. The purpose of Chapter 91, actually goes back to the old colonial ordinances. It's one of our oldest environmental structures that we have. And it is really fundamentally about protecting the public's rights of access and navigation, access to and navigation along our tidelands, our rivers and streams, and the great ponds, which are ponds that are greater than 10 acres in size in their natural condition. So anytime somebody wants to fill or build a structure or dredge in these resources, it requires a license or a permit from Mass DEP under Chapter 91. However, many of these dams, particularly the smaller headwater dams that are even maybe not jurisdictional under the DCR dam safety, they did not receive a license when they were built. Many of the larger dams now do have a license that was, developed on them afterwards. But the law itself and the regulations provide DEP with the authority to just issue a determination saying that a structure that no longer has a useful purpose or is a nuisance, if it has a license, they can revoke the license. If it doesn't have a license, they can order its removal. So, I think we just need to think about this differently and not be so worried about, oh, now you're dredging and filling by doing the dam removal. No. We're taking away something that's been imposed on this natural system, and we're restoring it to its natural condition. And we think DEP has authority just to write a letter and to say, yes, you can take that out. But if they do not agree with that and have concerns that might be challenged somehow, we are willing to work with the state and the legislature to get that authority further clarified. And just back to, all the purposes under the Wetlands Protection Act and our other environmental laws, including rare species, fisheries, etc. This is all about restoration. It's restoring natural processes, natural conditions, eliminating hazards, improving water quality, restoring the bordering vegetative wetlands that were drowned by the impoundment, but that come back right away with that natural seed bank, and improving really public access and navigation. You can't canoe down a river if you have to stop and get out and portage around a dam. So that's kind of the framing that I'm thinking of under the laws. And what if we kind of flip things around and from the way it is now, where you have to go through all of these long, complicated processes to get permission to remove it? What about if we were like Spain that says, if you have a dam that you're not using anymore, you have to remove it? what if we said cranberry bogs, when you abandon them, you can't just leave those several feet of sand and all the water control structures in there that are permanently destroying the system. Let's require them to be restored. And what about if all those ditches and embankments on the salt marshes, we, instead of making it really hard to go through a 3 or 5 year process of permitting and post restoration review, let's just go ahead and do the work. Now, I don't think that the legislature or the agencies are going to actually order all the private landowners to do all of this, but at a minimum, we should make it a lot easier. And that would require a systems change. So Massachusetts has actually been working on this for a long time. I served on an aquatic habitat restoration task force at EEA back in 2007 that came out with this report charting the course. And at that time recommended streamlining for restoration projects. There have been some efforts on this, and I credit the agencies for working diligently to try to make the system better. They've adopted the ecological restoration permit processes and some changes to the MEPA, the environmental review statute. But it really it has not achieved the kind of streamlining that we truly need. And in some cases, actually, unfortunately, is making things even more complicated because there's such a long list of conditions that every single project has to conform to in order to use those provisions. Other states are doing this innovation, as California and Pennsylvania, and many other states are looking at streamlining restoration. So there's other models, and the states now, Massachusetts is now looking at some of that. But it's all available, and you'll have a link when you get the PDF. Ideally, what we'd like to see is a single application process, one agency responsible for shepherding it through, maybe getting input from other agencies as needed, and that you're going to get your permit in 3 months if your application was complete to begin with. But to get there, we're probably going to have to do some interim steps, and that could include some general permits for certain categories of work. Like maybe we look at the dams and we say, small headwater dams, below a certain size, there's no structure or road or infrastructure within X distance, whatever. And you test the soil, there's, no contaminants of concerns, maybe get real quick approval, maybe even a general permit where these qualified contractors and consultants can just come in and then self-verify. Whereas maybe some of the larger projects need a broader review. You could also think about watershed-based planning, do a whole sub-watershed and with multiple sites that need to be restored. So it could include a few different dam removals and a culvert upgrade. And I mean, they're doing this down on the Cape. There's some cranberry bogs that are going to be removed, and that's removing the water controls and upgrading culverts and all that too. So bundling things together and approving them as a single permit, even for perhaps multiple sites under different ownerships. So how do we get from where we are to where we need to go? The state is taking this seriously. They've established a wetlands and waterways streamlining initiative, and they have external stakeholder input. I'm on that group. So it's the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions, Allie from CLF, and many other good people. Unfortunately, that process is not just focused on restoration. It's also talking about development and other things. So it gets a little confusing. I was on a call recently about it where I was talking about the public interest under the Wetlands Protection Act, and then somebody, chimed in, well, like, hey, roads and highways have public interest too. Well, yes, they do, but they're different public interests. And I'm talking about environmental public interests here that we should be restoring. There's a dam removal sediment management guidance document that DER and DEP worked on several years ago, and it was almost ready to be published, and then it got held up. I think they're working on that again. I hope that can be finished soon. This DEP will be coming out with, I think, with what they're calling climate resilience 1.5 regulations draft very soon for comment. This will be an opportunity to comment to them about restoration streamlining. And then we can also begin to think about and discuss what else can we do? How can we make statutory amendments to further streamline and combine permits? So this is the concept of where we are and where we want to go. Right now, all of these structures are causing ongoing damage every day they remain in place. They're blocking the sediment, they're blocking the fish, they're blocking the wildlife, they're messing up water quality and flow, etc. So right now it's easy just to allow that ongoing damage to continue. How about if we flip that and just make it much easier to remove these things and to create incentives to stop the harm? And right now it's very difficult to do that because there's so many requirements in order to start the restoration work. So let's flip that around and remove the barriers to removing barriers. It's a big challenge, and it's going to require a lot of people working together. But the way you get to big solutions is to have a big goal and a vision. We need an overall vision and goal, and then we can drill down to objectives and then figure out what are the steps to get there. I have to say, one thing I'm concerned about in the streamlining process is that there's a lot of focus on what are the incremental steps we can do now. Yes, that's important. We need to think that, but we also need to establish what is the big overall goal that we're aiming for so that those interim steps will be most appropriate to advance towards that bigger ultimate goal. And Mass Audubon has launched a campaign to accelerate wetlands restoration across the Commonwealth. Invite you to visit the webpage. There's a place there where you can click to sign up to get involved in the campaign. You will then get on our list. I promise we're not going to bombard you daily with emails. You'll get a monthly e-news, and you will get timely alerts when there is a time to take a particular action. Like we have a bill pending that would accomplish some of this. So when that bill comes up for a hearing, you would get notified and have some background information on how you can comment. And if there's other, like the regulatory reforms, the draft regs out for review. So go to this website, read more, and sign up today. And I'll flip back to this in a second, but I just want to say I have a bunch of resources in here too. There's a new river restoration permitting guide out from FERCog. There's tons of resources from the SNAP network that are useful, not necessarily for dam restoration, but for some other things like buffer zone restoration. They have a guide on that and lots of other related info. So this will all be in the PDF that you will get. And I'm going to stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heidi. And thank you, Michael. That was a great presentation with a lot of really good information. I know that all of these resources will also be on our website, everyone. So you will get the PDF and the resources and the information to sign up. And I also see that there is a plug in the chat for a dam management committee session. And that information will also be provided to everyone. I know that we have about 10 minutes left, so as people think of them, if you have additional questions or things you'd like Heidi and Michael to comment on, please go ahead and drop those in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll answer them. I'll just jump right in with the first one from David. He asks, I think one success has been that MIPA will waive its process for certain ecological restoration projects. Can you comment?
Yeah, there were some revisions to the MIPA regulations a couple of years ago that I worked on with MACC and CLF and MIPA and the EJ table on that, where that we now have a provision. If you're doing an ecological restoration project, in most instances you can just file like a notification and avoid having to do a full environmental impact report. However, there also were changes to the statute a few years ago that require that any project that's in an EJ community or within a mile of an EJ community is a mandatory environmental impact report if any MIPA review at all is triggered. And so that would require a change in statute, which we've been reluctant to pursue because it was put into law for good reason to protect the EJ communities from, bad projects. So it's a bit complicated and may require some careful thinking, some consultations with the EJ community, and seeing if we can come to any agreement on language that they would be comfortable with, recognizing that this is only for beneficial projects that's going to improve their environmental conditions. We would not amend the MIPA statute in that regard for development projects.
Great, thank you. I don't see any additional questions. If anybody has more, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A feature or in the chat, so we can answer your questions. I guess in the meantime, while we wait for people to kind of process everything and think through their questions, one question I'd have is just when you're, working on some of this advocacy and things like that, what are some of the biggest, I guess, questions you get or pushback you get on some of these thoughts and ideas and recommendations?
That a question for us or for?
Yeah, for both of you. I wonder what kind of, questions you get, biggest questions you kind of get when you're giving these presentations or talking to state agency staff or other key players. What kind of your biggest questions that you get out of it are?
Question I hear is like, why aren't we making it easier, faster? I don't know. And I think that there's some genuine concern from some of the agencies about potentially messing up these resources. That they recognize that most of the nonprofits and municipalities that are trying to do this work are responsible, but they're worried that any streamlining could, let bad actors or somebody who's sloppy do something harmful if it's not carefully overseen. And I would just say that we need to balance that with the tremendous amount of harm that's happening now from leaving all this fill and structures in place in our wetlands and rivers. Michael, do you have any?
Yeah, I'll echo what Heidi said. I noted that Massachusetts has a lot of expertise, and we can tag that onto the Riverways program years ago as being the nucleus of this ice crystal, and a lot of practitioners. Now, the funny thing is in the permitting, you can go and delineate the resources for a dam removal, and then, mean annual high water, bordering vegetated wetlands, you're going to have big yellow equipment operating within that. So that goes to the regulations are not adapted. And one of the themes I hope I was able to convey to the folks participating today is the importance of getting this done quickly. We're not building dams in reverse. We're not going to build a huge cofferdam to then take down a dam and then build a cofferdam to take down the cofferdam on an infinite and iterative process. I think we've got this down very well. We've seen the outcomes of dam removals that are just incredibly successful, no matter how you want to measure them, whether alteration of lotic habitat or lentic habitat back to lotic habitat, restoration of aquatic connectivity, restoration of downstream sediment transport, and the habitat that supports. So I think recognizing that the regulations are set up to limit and reduce risks, and we found that these risks don't exist here. And quite to the contrary, I pointed out two examples where dam removals were done, one in Massachusetts, one in Maine. And actually Amethyst Brook was also, Bartlett Rod Shop Company Dam was funded in part by the Holyoke coal tar settlement, that these projects are widely acknowledged as having positive benefits. And if you look nationally, we've got the Penobscot River Restoration Project, you've got the Kennebec River removal of Edwards Dam, you've got the Elwha Dam removal, you've got the Klamath. The list goes on. So everything says these are positive projects, and we really need to do that. And I think Heidi really touched on the value that these projects bring, and we're incongruous with the regulations.
Right. And I think Chapter 91 in particular comes up over and over again. The question of why on earth do I need a Chapter 91 license to remove a structure? And in terms of navigation and public access, I'm returning the system to a natural state where that now exists again. And same with restoring a cranberry bog. Why would I need a license to remove fill that was never licensed in the first place? So I think that's like, and that's one of the more difficult, time-consuming, expensive permits to do, and then it has to be recorded on the deed. So why would we record something on a deed when there's no structure there anymore? 30 years from now, people are going to look at that and go, what's this for?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That is good context. We have another question in the chat from Ron, and he asked if it can be permitted and done in 7 months like Dudleyville, why not repeat that? I assume that meaning that, process on all but the most complicated dams.
I'll
Good
take that.
question.
I think that's a great question. It also goes into Mia McDonald's question about sediment testing and what should be done. So, Ron, I think that's exactly what we're getting at with Dudleyville. And that was the same process on a dam that posed substantial risks. May I just keep going into Mia's question?
Yes, please. And just for everyone, let me just read it so everyone hears it. Mia's question is for Michael. Could you provide details on the sediment testing and management in dam removal projects? What might be found in the sediments in Massachusetts that applicants may want to be aware of?
So there's all kinds of stuff that can be found in sediments, and that's a good issue. First off, though, Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation Office of Dam Safety does not regulate dams or dam safety hazard ratings based on sediments. However, let's start over just south of Boston on the Neponset River. You got a lot of PCBs. Before you think that's a one-off, and that's actually retarded work on advancing restoration on the Neponset. Let's go to the biggest river in the western part of the state, the Houstonic River. Oh, it's also got PCBs. Now, the Houstonic's fascinating. You've got 2 dams there, Woods Pond Dam and Rising Pond Dam, that have a lot of PCBs behind them. And the federal consent decree for that surplus site, failure of those dams and release of those sediments is a consent decree opener on those. So the owner and caretaker of those dams is very diligent in their dam safety studies. Beyond those, you have an entire broad spectrum of contaminants. Here in New England, we have some atmospheric deposition, mercury, we see arsenic coming up, a lot of artifacts of former manufacturing. But what we've seen is these are often ubiquitous in the landscape. So the typical protocol for sediment sampling follows on a great spreadsheet that's been worked on by Division of Ecological Restoration. Alex Hackman started it years ago, and others have kept updating that. But it's very robust. It's tied to accepted criteria. And for Dudleyville Dam, DER now for these preliminary design studies has us going out there and actually collecting sediment samples and analyzing those for what can generically be called the 401 suite. If you have much in the way of fine sediment, I'm of the opinion you should take a look at that sediment to understand the risks, but recognize these dams aren't regulated based on the risk of immediate release. And dams do fail. I hope that begins to answer the question, Mia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, Ron and Mia, for your questions. It looks like we're a minute away from time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. We had 3 additional questions that we didn't get to, so maybe if we can send them to you after and you're able to respond to them, that could be helpful. But thank you, everyone, for participating. Thanks, Heidi and Michael, for joining and giving us such robust and good information on this topic. We will follow up with all the resources afterwards, and they'll be available on the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance website. Please make sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. It's both in the chat here, and it'll be sent to you in an email afterwards. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our 2 sessions in June. That'll be June 4th and June 11th. Thank you again, everyone. Thanks for attending, and thank you, Heidi and Michael. That was great.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.